worked at Twitter for about 3 years in San Francisco, and immediately after that started Observe in 2017. Observe is building AI and automation software for the customer service market. It's a very old market, and there's a lot of processes inside the customer service operations which are very manual and tedious. We bring AI and automation to help businesses improve those processes and make the lives of millions of contact center workers better and faster, and providing a great customer experience. It's been 3 years for us in existence. We have more than 160 plus customers across North America, 150 plus people in the company, raised more than $90 million in venture capital. I'm personally based out of San Francisco, and happy to talk through my journey of early days with all of you today. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Swapnil. And Sima, would you like to?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening to all the folks listening to us from India, and good morning to my fellow panelists. My name is Simha Sadasiva. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Usher. Paul and I go back a long time. Paul has been a great mentor for me over the years. Product background, I've spent 20 plus years building massively scalable infrastructure. That's my background and pedigree. Usher has been a 5-year journey, and Usher basically is a company that my co-founder Henry Peter and I created with a vision to basically bring modern ways to interact and engage with consumers, given the fact that consumer behavior has changed. So we bring a lot of technology to bear to help insurers, financial services companies to digitize and automate all of their customer journeys. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you.
And thanks for including Uniphore as part of this engagement. So Stuart Ferguson, I'm the VP of Sales for North America for Uniphore. Uniphore's been around for 12 years, and really we are a company built on AI and around our conversational service automation, and really helping companies with providing automation and then also insights. We've been around for 12 years. We actually started in Chennai, India, and have been in the US for about the last 2 years. So a lot of learnings with that engagement. And we're really focused on just automating what the agents are doing in that customer service area, whether it's providing self-service at the front end, or whether it's about the automating the agent's desktop. So the insights, the sentiment, next best action, and then really wrapping it up with the after call work. So really allowing the agent to focus on their customer versus the day-to-day interaction of their job. So super excited about being here. And Paul, really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Stuart. And next up is June Bauer. So June, can you please introduce yourself? Can we please bring June? Yeah.
Hello, everybody. And I am absolutely delighted to be here with all of you today. I started my career in the Silicon Valley because I grew up here. And I was lucky enough to learn from, in my opinion, the very best marketer in the world, and that was Steve Jobs. I started at Apple in 1981, before the Macintosh, actually, and I got to learn basic product marketing there. And then ultimately, I became the consumer marketing manager of the Macintosh, the first consumer marketing manager of the Macintosh. I went on to 3Com, where I met Paul, and really lucky to have met Paul Singh, because not only is he an incredibly smart person, but he's an incredibly nice person too. So we've known each other for many, many years. I've gone on in the Silicon Valley to be a vice president of marketing, or CMO, at many companies, including Adobe Software, Cisco Systems. I was the CMO and also the general manager of the online business for WebEx during WebEx's heyday, and also was at a startup called Mobilitech that was ultimately bought by Alcatel. And I went on to be the vice president of marketing for the division of Alcatel that bought our product. So I've had a lot of experience. I also worked at a venture capital company called Lightspeed Venture Partners, where I was a partner, and my job was to look at investments, but also to work with the portfolio companies to help them with their marketing. So for the past 7 years, I've been doing consulting with startups because it's my passion and I love entrepreneurs. And I have worked with companies from France to India to China to Singapore to the US, and I love it. So that's what I'm all about.
Thank you very much. Can we bring the whole panel together, please? So just the way we are going to conduct this session, folks, is we're going to split it into 5 different sections. We're going to start with talking about the early sales issues that you guys all dealt with. Then we're going to go into the early marketing issues. And then we'll talk about starting from India versus US, which is another common debate that entrepreneurs struggle with. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the learning on the pricing side, and then talk about growing your sales and marketing. And then we'll end with all the miscellaneous stuff in the questions and answers. All right. So with that, let's get started with talking about the early sales. I think Sima, I think I obviously, you know, that we were sharing the office at that time, and I know a lot of the struggles you went through in the beginning. So, you know, various entrepreneurs are kind of looking for a guidance to say, you know, they are probably sitting in their own garages thinking, hey, you know, what to do next. So what are the things that you learned in your early sales cycle, you know, as to how to really find these customers and, you know, what struggles you went through? What can they learn from that?
Yeah, so for us, we kind of had an idea about our constituents that we wanted to serve. Coming from the world of communications and building platforms for servicing large telco providers, that was my background prior to starting Usher. I knew that from the core DNA of the founders that we were mostly building a product and a platform for enterprises, right? So we were not focusing on a go-to-market that was consumer facing. And so we were very clear in our own minds in terms of who we were serving. And just segmenting within that enterprise, which is such a broad area to focus on. We looked at the small and medium business market. We looked at the mid market, and we looked at the large enterprise market. And early on, we did some experiments to see if what we were trying to solve was relevant for the SMB market. And we understood that the things that we really were talking about bringing to bear to our product idea was mostly appreciated by large enterprises. So some experiments that didn't work well for us in the SMB market allowed us to not focus on that and focus mostly on the large enterprise market. And that kind of enabled us to, you know, keep the focus there and build product, go to market in that segment. So that segmentation was important for us.
So it's kind of interesting. You took the enterprise route, and you know, for most startups, that is probably the most difficult route to take. So what kind of made it successful for you? Like, what was the, you know, the aha moment where you said, okay, this is the market, and we are going to be able to be successful in this market?
I think the product aha moment for me was when a friend texted me and asked me permission if it was okay to call. That was the aha moment for me that made me realize that consumer behavior had changed or was evolving, and that people didn't want to talk to each other over the phone anymore, right? And so we realized that there was an opportunity to bring that form of interaction that our social behaviors were evolving towards for the enterprise, so they could actually reach their constituents through those digital means. And so from a product perspective, that was the aha moment for us. But from a go-to-market perspective, I think as we looked at the large enterprise market and saw what was being done by large insurance companies, financial services companies, in the way they were servicing their constituents, their brokers, their members, their claimants, we realized that they were significantly stuck in a legacy world of paper, fax, And so we saw the opportunity there as we did a lot of interviews with prospective buyers. And so we kind of zeroed in on that segment of the population that we wanted to go after.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to you in a few minutes, but I want to, so you went towards the large enterprises, and I think Swapnil, on the other hand, chose mid-market. So I want to talk to you, Swapnil, about your journey and why mid-market? How did you decide what customer to go after?
Yeah, it's a great question, Paul, and I think a lot of our decisions that you see today, which might look obvious, like why we decided mid-market, sometimes are a result of a lot of experimentation that we did early on. So when we started the company, we clearly knew we were not a B2C company. So then you go into B2B. Then we started looking for geo segmentation. We said, hey, we're not going to sell in India. We're not going to sell in Southeast. We're not going to sell in Europe. US is our market. So then we narrowed down to US. Then as you come to US, you're now looking at two more dimensions. You could look at different industries, and then you can look at customer size. On the customer size, you can do SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. For us, it was very clear from a product value perspective that our product is meant for organizations which have, say, at least 100 contact center agents who have some maturity in their operations versus early stage. So we decided that, hey, from a product market fit standpoint, like SMB is not a fit. So that left us with mid-market and enterprise. And then all industries. And then we further narrowed down to from enterprise and mid-market, we said, we had in our team, one of our co-founders had experience of go-to-market, and we knew that selling to enterprise from day one is going to require a lot of security certifications around SOC 2, PCI, FedRAMP, a lot of requirements on reporting, audit, et cetera. And we knew that that's not what we want to focus on day one. We want to focus more on the core product value, core innovation before bringing this adjacency in the product. So that led us to mid-market. Through a law of exclusion, we realized all other markets are not a fit for us. And purely from a product market fit standpoint, mid-market is a sweet spot for us where there's a product market fit and there's also a go-to-market fit where we can sell today versus an enterprise where we can't sell today.
So it's kind of interesting. So, Sima's company took the tact of coming at it from the large enterprise. You saw mid-market. And I know I've talked to June many times, and she works with various startups that have taken the route of coming at an SMB and then starting to grow, and Salesforce being one very classical example. So June, can you share your example, your experience of how some of the companies that you work with, why they chose that market and how they went about it?
Yeah, I think choosing the right market is really important for your product. But I think what you have to understand as an entrepreneur is, you can start somewhere and quickly learn if it's working or not. And it's okay to change if it's not working. I just want everybody to know, and you probably already do, but the life of an entrepreneur is about failing all the time and learning quickly. And so I think it's important that you make your best hypothesis, and then you try your best to see if you can make it work. I think what you really need to understand about your product isn't your product. You know that really well. It's who's going to care the most about not your product, but the problem you're solving with your product. So for example, it just very easy example, because we all know this Tide with bleach. You guys all know Tide and the Procter & Gamble product. I know we're not probably selling consumer packaged goods, but I think the example is good across any market. What you really want to think about with all these consumer products like Tide with bleach is they weren't just saying, hey, our product gets your clothes clean, because there's hundreds of other laundry detergents in the market that do that. And so the question becomes, who's going to care the most about Tide with bleach? And what Procter & Gamble said is it's going to be young families with kids, because Tide with bleach claims that they can kill bacteria that causes sickness in families. And so what they're doing is they're going after this very specific audience, not based on their product, but based on the problem they think they can solve for consumers. The same is true when you look at if you're selling to enterprises, right? What is the problem you're solving is the question you need to ask. And then the follow-on question is, and who is going to care the most? And I'm going to tell you right now, it's not going to be enterprise or small business. I mean, potentially, yes, but you've got to take it even to a more specific level and say, okay, in enterprises or in small business, who's the person? I worked with a company called Sight Machine recently. They sell, they basically, what they do is for very large manufacturers, they pull all the streaming data off the machines and make it useful to companies. And they said to me, well, who's our target audience? I mean, should we go after OT or IT? And I said, well, maybe let's think about it differently. I don't think it's about someone's job, it's about someone's mindset. And they were going after someone who was a champion, who was willing to think different, who was on the leading edge of manufacturing, who was willing to embrace digital, right? So you really, besides and beyond thinking about, is it small business or enterprise, you really have to think about what kind of person is going to care the most about the problem you solve.
Thanks, June. So Stuart, your company went in a different way in terms of where it found its initial customers, and then you were brought in later. And so how is the definition of customers and finding the early customers for you in the US? How was that impacted, and how did you go about it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So a couple things and thoughts on that is, and as June had mentioned, our solution has morphed probably about 4 times at this point. So what we started doing was it still is the rich history of where we are at today, but as far as our go-to-market product has changed, and really we now have this platform that we deliver. But to your point, Paul, is that we did start in India. That was mainly because that's where our core co-founders were based out of, and that's where their connections and their networks were. And then we grew to the JPAC region. And then we have a couple large investors, March Capital and now JC2, which is John Chambers. It's his own personal, VC fund. And when John got engaged with the company, he said to our CEO, Amesh, he said, if you're going to make it, you need to come to the US. And so that's really what was, brought us to the US. And quite frankly, if I look at our pipeline and our portfolio of customers in those beginning stages, a lot of our customers are those that we got introduced through relationships. So whether they were investors or personal relationships or people you have in your network is how we got started. So that's definitely one area that I would definitely focus on. The other thing that you want to do is as you look at your customers and who you want to go after. So we did all the same things that everyone else has already mentioned, is looked at your vertical. We happen to be an enterprise. We want only 500 agents and above. We're in the customer service space. But, what we really want to do is we want to partner with customers that you truly have a champion and that you have an executive sponsor in, right? Somebody who as June just talked about, was what is the problem you're solving? You're not selling them technology, you're solving a problem within the business. And what are you solving there? So for example, AT&T, they had a big challenge with getting clean data, being able to utilize that later after the call to analyze and to improve their products, to improve the way that the agents are trained, all these different areas. And so our platform's able to deliver that, but it wasn't a technology play. It was how we were able to solve that. So I would really focus on how your solutions, solve problems. And then as you go out and look at these companies, find companies that want to partner with you. All the companies that we've been working with, we have great relationships where we can call, at all different levels, but, you can call in a favor. Hey, would you be a reference here? Would you be able to do something? And so it's not just a transactional, it's really that engagement in that relationship.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So let me kind of summarize just for people who are listening in later on, that basically the key message here is, hey, find out the problem you're solving. Who are you really solving for? And, many of you chose different market segments, but at the end of the day, even though you are selling to the companies, and that's really important, in the end, you're selling to people. So you have to figure out who has that problem, who can associate with that problem, and how to find those people to be able to sell your initial customers, right? So with that, let me kind of switch the gear a little bit and, let's switch to sort of the early stages of trying to market your solution, trying to figure out this problem statement and trying to get your statement right. So maybe I'll go back again to Sima. And so Sima, I know your product in the beginning, you thought various things it could do, various segments it could go after. So how did you kind of resolve that messaging or that problem statement and, you know, which is something that all the marketing people struggle with because trying to develop a message on what you do is probably as important, and so is your slide deck and everything else that follows from that. So can you please talk about your experiences in that area?
Sure. So this is a blind spot for a lot of product background folks, right? And I've certainly had not done any marketing or sales roles prior to starting Usher. Um, you surround yourself with good advisors and mentors who can kind of help you hone in that message, right? Or create that messaging platform that allows you to understand who you are, what you do, who you're segmenting or targeting, and how do you bring that message out in all of your materials, whether it is on your website or whether it is your sales decks that you put together. And so for us, Paul, we went through a couple of iterations. We, of course, brought in some marketing, folks that eventually did not work. But the true north for us was listening to the customers, listening to our prospective customers who had leaned in already, and making sure that we could relay that message that helped them understand what value we were creating for them, so we could actually rinse and repeat that message out to other prospective buyers. So we went through 2 or 3 iterations of coming up with our messaging platform. But the one thing that has been constant throughout our journey has been the fact that we have been championing for that end user, that constituent. That has not changed for us. So our product has not had to be pivoted, and we have not had to change the core product per se, but the way we pitch or sell has evolved over time, and we've better understood the buyer, the persona that we were actually talking to. And so that has taken several iterations for us.
Sorry. So thanks, Emma. So Swapnil, your journey, on the other hand, has been only 3 years, and you made really great progress. So you must have done something right in this area, or maybe you just hit out of the park, got lucky. I don't know what the
I will take the get lucky option.
So tell us a little bit about your, kind of how you came up with your messaging, how you decided, what is the problem statement that really resonates.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a funny, Paul, where all of us who are so deep into our journeys are talking about some of these buzzwords like positioning, messaging, all of that. But really, when we started the company, we didn't know all of this. We really didn't know all of these buzzwords. And in the early days, I think that's my recommendation to founders as well. Try to focus simply on the persona, the problem, and then all of these buzzwords, messaging framework, positioning framework, and doing ICP exercise. Yes, all of this will happen over time. But right now, you barely have a product, you barely have a customer, right? So same for us. I think in the early days, it was a lot about, Sima touched upon this, but one of the big mistakes founders make, especially product bent founders make, is they take a lot of time to go to market. They sit in their room, they sit in the garage, they build the product, they read websites, they read TechCrunch, and they think they know what a user want, or they know how to sell, or they know what problems users have. And because you're so picky about your product, you're like, oh, this color is not good. Let me change this drop down. Let me change this box here. Doesn't matter. Like, does not matter to your users. And because you're coming from a product background, you don't know that enterprise sales take more than 6 months or more, right? You're not gonna get a contract anytime soon. So even if you demo something to someone today, like, they're not buying what you have today. They're buying what you have 6 months later, 1 year later, 2 years later. So what really worked for us in the early days was we did not build a product. First, we started selling. It's kind of like opposite of what usually people do, because we knew that even getting to a demo stage is going to take 3 to 6 months. No one is going to give you a call and say like, oh, show me your product. So we created a deck, and now I'll use the word buzzwords of positioning, but like we created a deck and we wrote down some things in there. Let's not call it positioning. We wrote down like, hey buyer, these are your problems and this is what we do. And we started going to market. Because we had a sales co-founder, we started reaching out to people through cold emails, cold calls, getting on a call. We didn't have a product. We were showing mocks. We had a deck, we had a mocks. We didn't have a product. And we just like testing, hey buyers, so we, because of technology innovation, you can do this, you can do that, and we were just seeing like, is this working? Do they have questions about it? Are they able to relate to these problem statements? What specific problem statements are they asking more questions about? And you keep refining and honing the problem areas, right? So in the early days, that's all we did, like deck, mocks, go out to market. And you can change your mocks in one day. You can't change your product in one day. You go on a call, you learn that, hey, this particular customer is more interested in this. We're like, okay, we're going to change our mock to reflect that, because we're learning, we're iterating. And I think that's sort of like what we did in the early days. It was very heavy founder led. Like it was me, Sharat, Akash, all these co-founders coming up with these problems and decks, because see, the founders are the most closest to problems. Like if we had gotten anyone externally, it would have taken them 3 months to 6 months just to understand the problem in the market and things we are solving. So all of this in the first 1 year, 1.5 year, and to a certain extent, even today, a lot of like the bigger aspects of the company are driven by me, driven by Sharat, driven by Akash, because we know these problems and market really, really well. So that's my sort of like story and recommendation, right? Like go out, try, experiment, fail, and like just get out of your room and like talk to the customers, and they will tell you what's working, what's not working. Like stop reading tech trends, stop reading other competitors' websites, stop reading Gartner's. Like talk to your buyer, they will tell you what they need. And up to your first $1 million ARR, forget about like these buzzwords. Like build a product that serves user, get to $1 million, and then we can talk about positioning, messaging, framework, ICP, all of that. For $1 million ARR, you do not need any of that. So don't get into the trap of starting to solve some of these bigger problems that are more late stage problems technically.
Okay, well, thank you, Swapnil. So that's a good segue into someone who I consider as a messaging guru and positioning guru. And so I'm going to call on June to basically talk about her experience in terms of, because she's been dealing with lots of startups who are struggling with trying to define their customers. And believe it or not, I've seen startups build even $5 million of ARR and not still know who their customer is. And then the growth just stalls. It doesn't go anywhere. And so with that, let me bring on June to talk about that.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And Swapnil, I love your advice. I think it's so pragmatic and so smart. And I do think you need to start by learning and understanding. And it's going to feel scary. And I think that was kind of what he was hinting at. It's going to feel scary, but you've got to be assertive and get out there and get people to try your product. And I highly recommend you think about creating an advisory group right away of people who have contacts, who can connect you with people that you can go to try your product out, even if it's just wireframes or whatever you've got. Get out there and start talking to people. And then, as Paul said, a lot of times, and these are companies that I work with a lot, people will be out there trying to sell it and they'll get to some level of growth and then it does stall out and they're like, hey, what's going on? Or they bring more salespeople on and the salespeople are complaining. And so there comes a time where you do want to firm up your story because you want your company to stand for something. And it's really important in the market that you as a company stand for something, not that you sell individual deals to all the potential customers. And then when people look at you for a new business, they don't really know what you mean. So the thing that I want to start by saying is that I think a lot of times, because we're all pretty technical and pretty kind of logical, we like to approach marketing by describing. And more often than not, when I work with entrepreneurs, they say, but June, I've described the product in detail and I look at their website and yeah, the whole thing, it's down to the, the bolts and how they're all assembled. And I go, hey, marketing is not about describing. Marketing is about persuading. And persuading is very different. So I would challenge all of you to go look at your websites today. Is your hero, the top of your website, is it about you or is it about your customer? and the problem they're trying to solve. Because ultimately what you want to do when you start doing formal messaging, which Swapnil's point is right on, when you're ready to do it, when you have enough experience, have a pretty good idea of what's going on with your product, your market, your customers, you really want to ask this question, is your website about your customer problem, or does it really launch into describing your product? Because here's the bad news today, and I hate to be negative because I'm usually incredibly positive, but the bad news is people don't care about you and they don't care about your product. They care about themselves and their own problems. So you really have to think through, how do you get out of your own shoes and into your customer's shoes? How do you look at things the way they do? And the thing we haven't mentioned yet, but I do want to mention, is when you're putting your story together, your persuasive story together, you've got to think about it from the customer perspective, meaning they're not just looking at your website, they're looking at every competitor out there as well. And so you should be looking at every competitor. And ultimately, what you want to do is choose a problem that your competitors can't credibly claim they can solve. You want to differentiate, and you don't want to differentiate on features. That's deadly. That's absolutely deadly. You want to differentiate on your problem. And that means you really need to know your competitors, and you need to know the other offers that are out there. I just want to quickly tell you about one quick story of a company that did this. They were having so much trouble. They had gotten out there, just like Swapnil said, they had been selling for, a little over a year. Hadn't gotten some customers, hadn't got a lot of traction after that. They sold to large clothing manufacturers, and they were selling a system that had AI for designing clothes better. And their message was all over the place, and it was just a mess, and it was all about them, and it was all about their AI. And I read it myself. I know a lot of technology. I couldn't understand it. So I worked with them. I started doing a lot of investigating. I looked at what their competitors were doing. I looked at what was going on in the market. What I saw is that there's this huge waste right now in clothes being returned online. It's an absolutely huge problem. There's all sorts of waste. It's costing companies an arm and a leg. And I said, why don't we reposition you on a different problem, which is the problem companies have, which is when they get returns, it's very expensive for them to deal with those. And it's very bad for the environment, both. So we repositioned their persuasive story around, how do we help people who are at these companies. We actually looked at a new market, which is the people who really care about the environment, to create a design process that is much more environmentally friendly and actually saves the company money. It improves ROI. And that enabled this company to really take off. The company's called Savitude. They did really well. So really thinking about your customer is critical in putting your message together.
So June, thank you.
Paul, I know it's not my turn. Just one point on June's point. June raised such an amazing point. When you're a product-led founder, you think your website is about describing your product in details, when it's not. We made that mistake a few times. Hopefully our website is not doing that mistake. But as a founder, you love your product a lot. You want to describe it to nth detail, and you end up in a big mess like June described. So I just want to say that's the biggest takeaway, I would say, on the marketing side that we learned.
Yeah. So I think this is kind of very, June actually does a guest lecture in one of my classes that I teach in marketing, where we really talk about, first thing is you got to understand your customer, and you got to put yourself in your customer's shoes. In fact, I have a slide on that, which if we had time, I would put up that slide and show you that. And the other thing that we always tell the entrepreneurs is to focus on what I call 3 Ws. Your site should tell you what is it that you do for your customers, and who is your customer, and why you. If you can come up with a messaging line in your hero that really communicates that, you will have a much better way. And then you have to have your CTA, so that once people, fall for it, what do you want them to do? Sometimes you want to sell the product. Sometimes you only just want to get their name. And sometimes you just want them to continue reading. So it's sort of depending on what business you are in. And so you got to do that. And not, these days you go to the website and the first thing that comes up is a bot telling you, hey, can I help you? I mean, to me, that's like, okay, I just came. You want me to go away? I will go away. So don't do those mistakes just because everybody else is doing them. And also one thing that all the startups do mistakes is they copy the company that is already, got thousands of customers, and they try to copy their message. You are different. Don't try to do that. So anyway, with that, let me just switch on to a different topic that I think is very near and dear to our audience. And that is, I'm starting from India. Which market should I go after? And I know there are a couple of different opinions here on that. So I'm going to start with Stuart first. And since Stuart went through a company which actually started in India, went towards the India market, and then tried to expand, and then came to the US. So in hindsight, knowing what you know, what would you advise, Stuart, other entrepreneurs who are sitting in India trying to do their first customer, discovery and trying to see which markets to go after?
Yeah, I would say it's really about a big piece of that is understanding who your marketplace is. And what I mean specifically by that is the lessons that we're learning today, because we're still learning, coming to the US, is that we serve different marketplaces. As a simple example, our product line in the US is a very congested space, right? There's lots of competition, but we're a very, it's in this enterprise space, we're a very, can't think of the word right now, but we're the markets, we're oh my gosh, I can't even believe that this is happening to me. But what I'm trying to say is that we it's the competition is so great. When we go over to JPAC, they don't have a lot of the tools that we have here in the US, and so you have to really figure out who your market is. I think a big part of this, just tying back into the marketing conversation we just had too, is about telling the story. Your customers want to hear stories of how you've helped other people. So that we've been able to do and bring that forward. However, we have had a lot of lessons learned because the US marketplace is completely different. The buyers are different. The way they buy is different. If you think about it, when we were in India, they were much more relationship, who you knew, how you were getting connected, those type of things. And so having somebody with that rich history to be able to start you there, definitely USA is much more competitive, much more costly to come into. So one area there is one of the things we're doing now is partnering with people, right? Finding other sources that can help you into these marketplaces. So you don't have to do it all on your own. You can actually have other companies that have their own marketing department, that have their own sales department, and maybe you become an element of that. So those would be some of my initial thoughts on that.
So I'm going to come to partnering later on, Stuart, time permits, but I want to go to Swapnil and talk to him about his experience. And, he has a very different opinion on this. So Swapnil, what's your experience and what would you recommend entrepreneurs?
Yeah, well, I have very strong thoughts on this, so might not go well. But I mean, it's about it's about see, when you start a company, what exactly is your ambition? Are you trying to build $1 billion company, multi-billion dollar company? And if you're doing so, what is your end market, right? And without, for the most part, we can say all SaaS companies, no matter where they start, India, US, Israel, they end up being, the biggest market end up being the US market, the North America market, right? Your US and your Canada market. If that's the case, one of the big mistakes that Indian entrepreneurs make when they start is it's easy to get Indian customers, right? Because you have network, you have connections, your friend works at a company, they will use your product, your investor will connect you to a company that works there. So it's easy to fall into that trap where you, because of that early momentum, because of that feel that, hey, I'm getting customers, you start going down that path. And when you get one customer who pays you something, there are multiple things are going to happen. Number one, you have now said you are getting counted on ARR. So your investors now expect you to get more ARR every quarter. And the only way you could do that is keep selling in India. On the product and go-to-market side, your product is being built for the Indian users. And I'm not even talking to the buyer. You're building the product for the Indian user, Indian persona. They have different needs. They have different psychology. The way they use the product is very different. Then you come to the third piece, the go-to-market motion. because now you have to keep selling in India. You have to build your marketing DNA, your sales DNA, all for India. And then, 5 years into the company, 2 years into the company, you realize, okay, we have reached to $2 million ARR. We can't expand beyond this market segment. So now either we go outside of India. Where do we go? So usually what you would see is Indian companies go out to Southeast, or some companies go out to Middle East, or some companies try to come to the US. And that's where I think the big transition happens. If you're selling to Southeast, that is still closer to the Indian market, the way Indian buyers buy, the way Indians users use the product. But if you try to make to the US, you are saying you're trying to change the DNA of the company, the marketing DNA, the sales DNA, the product DNA. And a lot of companies can fall into that cliff, where we have seen enough that all these companies who try to go sell, who have sold in the Indian market, not necessarily succeed. Again, Unifor has done a tremendous job through partner ecosystem, through bringing the US VCs. But that's one thing that I feel that companies struggle. We're like, hey, we are a completely Indian company, and now we have to come to sell to the US market, compete in a totally different market. So my recommendation, Paul, here is identify what's your big market, and from day one try to build, sell, market everything in that market. Like changing the DNA of the company is hard, because I am using the word DNA because it's not about like, hey, we will hire 2 sales rep and start selling in US. No, it's not like that. You have to change your marketing, you have to change your salespeople, you have to change your product, you have to change your CEO, you might have to bring them to the US. There's so much that goes in like making that shift, and a lot of companies, unfortunately, for whatever reason, can't make that shift very easily, to transition into a US company. And then because they're only selling in India market, JPAC, APAC, Southeast, then your TAM is just small. You can't become a large company. So it starts with like, what do you want to do, and go from there.
But Swapnil, on the other hand, there are many companies where they sell to the Indian market, let's say, and they send to various MNCs, and so they build a user base which sort of gives you references, right? Because one of the things Stuart mentioned earlier, it's all about references in the end, right? The first few sales are difficult, no matter which market you are in. And then it's about references, because customers want to see, hey, where have you been successful? Show me where the success lies. And having that multinational name does help, right? So what's wrong with that?
Yes. So even that multinational sell, Paul, is, as I said in the beginning, especially for us, would have been very hard. We wouldn't have succeeded. So we had to still go mid market. So even if we were selling in India, we are not selling to Bank of the HDFC Bank or IDFC Bank or any of those, right? So if we are, for example, selling to say Bajaj Finserv in India, and then coming to US and selling to a firm or a US credit company like that, and then saying Bajaj Finserv is a customer, like that reference would not work, because we are not saying the SBI Bank or the IDFC Bank are reference customers for us. So it's also about like, are these customers that you could potentially sell to in India, are they even referenceable and recognizable in the US market? And that would apply to a lot of companies. I think great it applies in terms of Unifor, because they sell to the top tier of the Indian market. Like we would have never been able to like sell to the top tier of the Indian market. We would still be in the mid market segment, and then that those customers would not be recognizable, would not be referenceable in outside of India market.
So Stuart, any comment on this conversation before we wrap up this section? And are there any other things you want to add, or anyone else wants to add?
No, I do totally agree on the DNA, because we came to the US probably about 18 months ago. And to that point, we created an office here in Palo Alto and moved our CEO from India. So it was a major transition that does disrupt the company. It just was the way that our company got started. I think the strategy for us was more to come to the US after being started out of India.
So DNAs can be changed.
They can be changed, just not easy.
So Sima, you went, your market is US, your development center is all in India. And, you've sold both in India and the US. And so what, any thoughts or any comments you would make?
Oh, for the record, Paul, we haven't sold in India. So it's not a market I understand very well. Yeah. I don't understand the Indian market from a buyer perspective. It's a very price sensitive market, like a lot of the South Asian markets, and we didn't want to get distracted. But what has worked for us is there's some tremendous talent out there, in the Indian market. I'm fascinated with the 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 way products are being built. I think the world is becoming a smaller place with the cultural experiences that are becoming more or less unified. And so we've been able to tap into that talent that's available in India. So India is a very strategic location for us as a company. So we run a lot of our product development and customer success out of India. Although our the GTM motions are in Western Europe and North America, and to some extent the English-speaking parts of Africa and Australia, New Zealand. That's how I would segment our
Mm.
accessible market for us. But from a product development perspective and customer success perspective, it allows us to access talent that is incredible at fairly capital efficient ways. And so we are leveraging India from those perspectives. But from a GTM perspective, we have taken a vertical approach to delivering our solutions in the insurance world, for example, and we have kept the focus there. Um, and the fascinating thing here is that the problem statements are universal, right? Whether you talk to an insurance company here in the US or South Africa or Ireland or New Zealand, the legacy nature of how those products are sold, distributed, built, serviced is more or less the same. So we can actually, with very little changes in our in the way we sell or package our solution, we are able to bring one solution out to market, and that has worked very well for us. And I don't think we can do that if we focus on the South Asian market, because it's a pretty price sensitive market, even if we go after the large tier enterprises there. So for those reasons we have stayed away from India.
So I think we are coming close to the end of the session. We got about another 5 to 10 minutes to wrap it up before we take some questions. And so I want to, I had a lot of other topics that I wanted to cover, uh, but I think the one part that I would like to spend a little bit of time on is like, what is the right time for me to bring on a VP of sales and marketing? And, I'm sure, a lot of times I hear from entrepreneurs that they hired their first VP of sales, didn't work out. They hired their first VP of marketing, didn't work out. And that's a pretty common theme I hear. So since you are on Sima, so maybe if you can do your brief remark on that, and then I'm going to go to other folks.
Yeah. So a lot of my fellow panelists here have talked about founder-led selling. So and that is so true. Founders have to be constantly be selling. In fact, our first insurance customer was a sale I made on a red-eye flight, 30-minute conversation sitting next to an executive from a large insurance company. And you have to find ways where you can actually overcome those objections that you typically find. So you can teach that in the early days because you're trying to change so many things. And as founders, we are very close to both the product, the technology, and you understand the market that you're trying to service. So it allows you as a founder an unfair advantage to be fairly nimble in the way you pitch and pivot and overcome those early objections. And we have made our fair share of experiments, mistakes, whatever you want to call it. Made a few bad hires. I think they're not. You make the best decision based on the vantage point that you're having at the time, and you learn so much. Right? Hindsight's always 2020. For example, we went from a horizontal approach to a vertical approach. So when you focus on an industry, you need to bring in people who can sell into that industry. It's not just Rolodex. It's not just the contacts and the connections. How you speak, what language you speak, the lingo that buyer in that particular industry understands, it's so important. So vertical selling works for us as a company. And so we have brought in talent that can address that both from a sales as well as from a marketing perspective.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Stuart, you probably can give a lot of these entrepreneurs a lot of advice on how to really hire a good VP of sales, right? Like what should they do when they are looking for a VP of sales, and how do they decide, how would they know this is a good candidate for them?
Yeah, no, for sure. That's a great question. One thing is, it sounds pretty basic, but make sure that you're clear on what you're looking for, meaning that you have goals and objectives and what they have to hit. Because a lot of people will come in and think that they've done it somewhere else. They haven't worked for a startup before. They don't understand the energy that it takes, the dedication, the creativity, all those different kinds of things, because you're wearing multiple hats to be able to make all that happen. And then as you set together that job description, the other part of that is making sure that they can demonstrate that. As others have mentioned here, I mean, I've been in situations where a VP's been hired to run a particular division, and they don't fulfill what they were, hired to do. And it's really because they didn't have that kind of experience to be able to bring to bear. Because it definitely takes somebody that has that experience. So thinking about, I'll hire this friend of mine because that person's a really good salesperson is not necessarily the best person for your VP of sales, right? Having them have relationships within the industry that you're going after, the verticals you're going after, those type of things. All those are really, really important. So I would say definitely take the time to vet that out, but also be very clear on what the expectation is of what you're asking for them.
Yeah, I think this is very well put. And I think one of the things I'll tell you, having hired a lot of VP of sales for various startups and others, the one thing that I always look for is, and this is a common mistake that most startups make because your investors tell you to make those mistakes. Unfortunately, they'll tell you to hire this guy because he is coming from this very large company where he has been very successful or she has been very successful. And that's a real sure shot recipe for disaster. So I look for a person who has actually worked in a startup, because I have seen a lot of VP of sales coming in from large companies. Nothing against them. They're very successful people and there is a right time for them. But you bring on them early and they don't know how to prospect anymore. They're not used to doing cold calls. They're not used to calling on somebody they don't know. And unfortunately, that's not how the startup things work. And so it is really, really important. At the right time, a right person needs to be hired. And it's very possible that your VP of sales you hired in the beginning may not scale to the next level. Same is true of your VP of marketing and so on. But that means at the right time, you got to make the right decision. So with that, anybody else has anything else to add on this topic before we kind of switch to the next topic?
I'll just say one quick thing, which is
just quick add on to that, because it's really important, is one of the values that we bring to the marketplace is agility, right? Is the speed, how quick you can respond to customers, how quickly, because if you look at some of these legacy competitors, it takes them 2 weeks to get them a quote. It gives them 2 weeks as they look at a maintenance key or some of this legacy stuff, where we really use the startup as an agility, in that we want to partner with our customers to be able to make that happen. So to your thought there, Paul, around having somebody that's been in a startup before, is you need somebody that can have that fast drive and be able to, get that out to your prospects and to your customers.
June, you had a comment?
I was just going to say, the more you can start the sales process online, the easier and probably less expensive it will be for you to get customers. And by that, I mean, let people try your product online, let people have an experience with it, drive as much as you can online, and use it as a way to generate leads and shorten the time to a sale. And that's definitely a trend right now in sales and marketing. And so think about, how can you make your product something people can at least try, a scaled down version online to start.
So there is one question which was addressed to June and probably meant for others as well, is, I'm doing a B2B2C platform, and it's typically the chicken and the egg problem. Who should we target first, business or customers? And how do we strategize that?
Oh, yeah, that's such a good question. And I've worked with many companies that are B2B to C. Financial Engines is a good example. You're probably not familiar with them, but they were bought recently. But what they did is they helped people with their retirement accounts at major companies, and the people were consumers, and but they sold the product to large Fortune 500 companies in the U.S. And what we realized was the product wasn't selling through because the consumers or the people that worked in the companies didn't know about it. The short answer is you've got to do both. You've got to have a strategy for how do you get the companies to want to buy the product, but they're not going to keep the product. So you end up with an attrition problem if you don't figure out how to get their customers on board. And so what we did was we were selling fine into the companies, but the end users weren't using the product. So we were going into companies and doing workshops for people. And we were also doing online marketing directly to the people who had access to the service. The other thing that you can do is you can market in your product. And so I think it's really important that whatever experience you create, that you try to reach out to people, convert them, get them to be evangelists for you through the product experience if you're building software. So all those things are really important. And unfortunately, it's a real challenge if you're going to do B2B to C. You've got to get both groups on board.
Swapnil, any comments on that?
Yeah, Paul, unfortunately not my sweet spot. So I would not comment. Yeah, I don't have expertise in that area.
Anybody else has any comments? Sima or Stuart?
I think June hit on this a little bit. I think your product has to be able to tell your buyer, your commercial buyer, which is the enterprise, what's the benefit to the end users. So embedding those experiences, are you improving the customer experience? Are you delighting your customers? Showing through analytics, showing through some ways where you're measuring the end user behavior or experience through the product. I think that helps you in articulating that message to the commercial buyer. In our case, for example, we were able to impact through the automation play that we bring. What used to take 3 weeks for the end user to complete a claim journey, we were able to deliver that experience in under an hour. And when we showed that experience to the commercial buyer in an insurance company, how delighted their customers were, how the NPS scores were being bumped up by almost 30, 40 percentage points through product-led analytics that are inbuilt in the platform, it enables your commercial buyer to lean in. And so that's an important consideration.
Yeah, I think the point that Sima made, which is very important, is that a lot of times, all of the entrepreneurs generally tend to be engineers, and they tend to only think of the first person that is going to buy the product, but you got to go deep and build your analytics to be able to show the value of your product on an ongoing basis. I.e., if you are selling a large enterprise product and, there are supposed to be 50 users doing something, and if you are seeing that nobody is using your product for a long time, and you have to first instrument your product to be able to do that, and then make sure that you can say, oh, okay, now there is a problem, I must do something about it on an ongoing basis. So we're going to wrap up. So I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds to sort of do your closing statements before we wrap up this session. So Sima, since you are up, why don't you start?
Yeah, TIE is an amazing platform. Personally, I have attended many, many years of the TIECon here in Santa Clara. I've listened to, some amazing speakers like Marissa Mayer and others who have inspired me. And so I think kudos to TIE for being such a force to promote entrepreneurship. It allows people with little pedigree, or you don't need to have fancy degrees. You don't need to have, been in big companies with big brand names to actually be an entrepreneur. So I've been, again, surround yourself with good mentors, focus on the fundamentals, don't subscribe to hype cycles, right? If you create a solution to a problem, and you can find ways to lower the friction in the way you actually take those products to market, you will succeed. But again, you should think about these as long journeys. These are marathons, right? You often hear success stories, but behind every success story, there are 90 other companies that don't make it through. So I think focus, fortitude, and being frugal in everything that you do. Those are the three things that I would probably, share as my uh, key pieces that has helped me. And you have to figure out what works for you.
Stuart?
Yeah, I would say definitely leveraging, the organizations out there. That, I would say be as inquisitive as you can and ask people questions. People love to share their knowledge and are willing to help you. And so even if you're just trying to get a thought process, thought all the way through, or a hypothesis, just don't feel embarrassed or afraid to go out and ask people, what their opinion is, because people will definitely share it, and you don't have to take their advice or their information, but it's all these data points are helpful in putting together exactly what you would want. So I would just share that. I know at our company, you could talk to anyone within our organization and they would take, 15, 20 minutes with you and share information based upon that. So just a thought out there about being inquisitive.
And June?
Well, I think all of you who are listening in are amazing. Being an entrepreneur is incredibly hard. It can be incredibly scary, but it can also be very fulfilling. But I have to say, I really admire all of you. And I want to just encourage you to keep the faith, believe in yourself, believe in what you're doing. Don't let people convince you otherwise. I know you're all passionate, and keep that passion burning. Also, don't be afraid to fail. Fail fast, try lots of things, learn quickly, keep improving, keep optimizing. And my last point to you guys is take the time to understand the world around you, understand the competition, customers, people. And that means understanding how people feel. And too often we don't want to think about feelings in our business. We want to think about technology and on and off and digital and how things work. But how people feel is going to ultimately affect your business. It's going to affect if people are willing to buy your product because they're going to feel like it's right and it's the right thing to do. They're going to affect if people keep your product. They're going to affect how people talk about your product to other people. So be aware of the human beings involved in your business endeavor, and that's going to really serve you well in your future success.
Okay, thank you. Swapnil?
Yeah, no, first of all, Paul, thank you so much for having us. Hearing, Sima kind of touched upon this. When you read these stories outside on TechCrunch, you only hear good news. You're like, this company raised this much money. Oh, this company acquired these many customers. And they might make it look like it's a very fancy journey, but it's a very long journey. There's a lots of ups and downs, even for Observe, and even before I started Observe, I spent 1 year struggling to figure out what idea I wanted to work on, right? So just want to say that it's a very long journey. It's a very fruitful journey if you really enjoy this. Take time to, don't just focus on outcomes. Like the news outside focuses on outcomes, but internally you should be able to enjoy the journey. And I think in this journey, keep a very learning mindset. June touched upon this, which is what you are doing you have not done before, what I am doing I have not done before, what Sima is doing he probably has not done that before. And all of us are literally learning every single day. We are solving problems that we have not solved before. There are enough resources like TIE, resources like this meeting that you're having. Lean on some of these. The startup ecosystem is generally very, very helpful ecosystem. We will give you time, we'll give you resources. I lean on to founders who are ahead of me. I lean on to people like Paul. I lean on to people like June, Stuart, who have done this better than me. I lean on to them for advice and guidance. Similarly, you can lean on us and it's like build that learning mindset as you go through this journey, as you solve problems that you have not solved before. Keep learning and you will get there. So that's my summary, Paul. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for making the time. This has been a great panel, and hopefully all the entrepreneurs who are watching this and will derive a lot of value. So I would summarize all the conversation into understand your customer. Take the time to understand your customer. Don't build a single line of code if you don't know the customer you are targeting. So please spend more time understanding your customer. And customer is both a company as well as individuals that are in the company. You have to satisfy both. And that will get you to do selling and marketing better than anything else. So put yourself in your customer shoes all the time. And nobody wants to buy your product. They want to buy a solution to a problem they have. So put yourself in your customer shoes, not in yours, and you will succeed. So thank you very much. And thanks a lot, everyone, for this great panel.
Thanks for having us, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you,
Good
Paul.
night.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Good luck, everyone.